All right, so I've started cleaning off the crankshaft here. So see on this portion here, you see I've already started scrubbing it down. When we took it to the machine shop, we had them machine these bearing surfaces, and you see these are highly polished now. They're very clean. They've been ground down 30 over. You can see they put a little mark on there, 30. So the point here is that when you're cleaning this, you don't want to mess with these bearing surfaces because now they're pristine and perfect, and we don't want to rub those at all. And so when I'm using the Scotch-Brite pads, I'm not going to get the Scotch-Brite on this bearing surface. But it's not the responsibility of the machine shop to remove rust from anything that you get them. All they're going to do is take care of the bearing surfaces that you tell them to work on. So I'm going through here and I'm going to clean up all the rust. This crankshaft was in some pretty bad shape. It's at the bottom of the engine, and the engine was had a combination of oil and coolant in it for 20 years sitting in a barn. So it needs a lot of work cleaning up, but it's not pitted. It's just surface rust. It's not that bad. So we'll be able to scrub that down. One of the things you'll notice on here is you'll see some drill out sections in here on the crank. And what these are, those are balance points. Those are places where the crankshaft itself has, they've taken material off of the crank to balance the engine. So it's kind of a neat thing to see. If you don't see that, maybe you need to get your engine balanced. Or if you purchased a new crankshaft, that might not be balanced. And it's kind of important. It gives you better performance. It'll run without being balanced, but it'll be really choppy. So the other thing you need to worry about when you get it back from the engine shop is the oil points. We need to make sure that you go through and you clean out all of these places, the oil passages. It's not really their job to do that. So I mean, they're going to machine it and they'll clean it, but if there's metal shavings in these oil galleries in through these oil points, once the oil starts pumping through there, when you start the engine running, it's going to mess these bearings up. So once you get it nice and clean, you need to run some WD through there through some pressure, and make sure that there's no metal shavings, no particulates or anything at all that would be coming through those oil points. So I'm going to go ahead and keep cleaning up on this, but just giving some pointers on what to expect when you get stuff back from the engine shop. And there you go. All right, so it looks pretty cleaned up. Got majority of the rust off there. If there's anything it's inert, it's not going to be a problem. The things I want to point out real quick. This is the main bearing surface for the front of the engine. This is where the pulleys connect on. The PTO goes right in here. And this surface right in here is not a bearing surface, but it's a sealing surface right in here. So you want to make sure that you remove any kind of rust or pitting or dents or anything that may have made this irregular. Because when you install the crank, you want to make sure you're not going to be dripping oil, and that's kind of an important thing. Now, on this side, it's a little less important because if it leaks in the front here, it'll leak off into the timing chain, which has its own way of lubricating, so it's not a problem. But in the back, where the flywheel goes, you need to make sure, this is where the flywheel goes, make sure that any corrosion or any residue from where the flywheel was connected is flat. This is when you connect that flywheel, you want that to be absolutely on a flat surface. So make sure that this surface is flat. And then the main seal will seal on this surface. This is not a bearing surface, but this is a sealing surface. So make sure that you clean this up. It has to be absolutely slick. So when you put that the rear main seal in there, you don't have dripping on the garage floor. So there you go. There's the crankshaft. We'll go on to the next little thing here. All right, real quick, I want to show you where these oil raceways go. So there's one here on this main bearing. Sorry, this is a rod bearing. But if you run your compressor through there, you'll see it comes out right there. And there's a number of these throughout the crank. You need to go ahead and get in there and just run some forced air through there, and make sure that there's no foreign debris in there that's going to cause any kind of oil problem. So when you get ready to take these the bearings off, obviously I don't have the bearings in, but the bearing mounts, these large metal pieces that hold the bearings in place, they're pretty snug in there. I mean, these move pretty easy, and you can just wiggle these out. Make sure that when you put them back, you put them with the front facing front, the front side with the water pump. But the bigger ones, the ends and the center, they have a set of threads in the middle of them. I don't know if you can see right there. There's some threads. The thread size matches the actual bolts that go in. So just a little trick here. You can thread those back into the center here to give you a little something to hang on to. So, I mean, these are not going to just come out. You can't wiggle these end ones out. They're very tightly machined into their little square spots here. If you, I've put a piece of electrical tape around here just to protect these threads. I've got this one on place right here. You take a little lead pipe. There you go. It was Colonel Mustard in the workshop with the lead pipe. You put that over the top. You can get it to go like this, and it will come free. See how easy that was? Now, the thing that you want to not do, you don't want to get in here and pry in this machined surface in here, because that has to be absolutely pristine. You don't want to cause any deflection or any kind of a distortion when you put the new bearings in. But that's a neat little trick. I want to say I learned that one from John Twist. He did something a little different. He actually mentioned that you can take a bolt and put it in there and pull it out. I just, out of luck, realized that it was the same size bolt that goes into these. So just a little trick there to help make it easier for you. This one here comes right off when you do it like that. So that's a slam dunk. So anyway, there you go. How to loosen those bearings without making any damage. A quick little thing to notice on here. Notice how this one has a number 2. And then this one here has a number 4. So basically it's 5 bearings, right? You have 1 in the front, 2, center is 3, 4, and then the last one here is 5. So that way you want to keep the bearings matched up with their prospective journals. So there you go. Just quick little thing. 2 and a 4 line up from the front of the engine to the back. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there you have the new bearings in there. You can see they have a little notch that it goes into. Really easy to do it right. The important thing here is just cleanliness. Keep everything clean. No hair, no dust, no dirt. Everything has to be absolutely clean when you're messing with this. You just want to set these in place. Make sure they're nice and flush all the way across. And then we're going to set the crank in place, and going to get some Plastigage and tighten them without assembly oil first to get a measurement with the Plastigage. And once everything is good and it's checked, then we're going to pull it all back out, and then we're going to put some assembly oil in here, and then we'll torque it back down to the right torque. So we'll get on to that next. One of the things you might be saying is, where are you going to put the thrust bearings? Well, those go right in these little slots right in here. You can see right in these little slots. There's one here, one here. There is not really a torque adjustment for these. They'll slide in there. You see that there's a slot on the top end where the top part goes, and there's a gap where the bottom one goes. So they'll fit in there. The idea here is to make sure that you put the leaded side toward the bearing surface, and the copper side goes against the non-bearing surface, or the flat surface of the inside of this this bearing housing. And for this exercise, where we're testing the tolerances here on the crank bearings, we're not going to mess with the thrust bearings. We're not going to do that until final assembly, because there's really not a lot of adjustment that you can do on that. I'm going to leave that until later. But you can see it moves just fine. Everything's good here. I'm just going to get ready to put the tops in and then do the Plastigage. So one more thing, while I got it in this position, you can see on the bearing there's a slot for the oil, and then you can see right here in the crank where that oil fitting goes. That's a pass-through fitting right here. So it's kind of interesting. You can see how that lines up, so that when the crank is turning, the oil can get into the bearings. And if you look at the other center one here, you'll see the same thing. You can see a where am I at? Okay, here we are. So turning. Make a liar out of me. The center one, here it is. Here we go. So this is the center. And so that one lines up with that slot as well. All three of those main bearings have those. The center ones here, that are the smaller ones, they don't have a slot in the bearing, and as such, they don't have a slot on the oiler either. So that's interesting how that works. Cleaned out all the bearing caps for the mains. These are the smaller ones, the center one here, and then the large one that goes on the back end. You'll notice on these that they have a very distinctive shape on the ends, so you're not going to be able to mix those up. But on the other ones, they say front, and the front will go toward the front of the engine, or this direction here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and put the top end bearings in. I've already got the bottom cleaned up, and I've got the crank in place. I don't know if you can see, I've got a piece of green Plastigage on all of the main bearings, and I'm getting ready to take a quick measurement here. So that's what I'm doing here. Everything's absolutely clean. Like I said, I've cleaned these off nice, make sure that there wasn't any rust or any residue from being in a machine shop without the bearing surfaces. I'm going to go ahead and set these in, and then we'll do the Plastigage. The trick with these very large bearings, the bearing caps have to slide into this little Jenga slot here, and it's really a tight fit. So basically what I did is I kind of eyeballed it. I tapped it in with a rubber mallet, just tap, tap, tap. And then once I got it to the point where you could run a bolt through it, I just basically lined those up. You can see they kind of line up ahead of the thing. And then you'll be able to pull them down. So just, you can be able to pull those down kind of evenly with the bolts as you go, and that'll come down nice and tight. The main bearings on the crankshaft, the torque setting is 70 psi. I'm just going to lightly tighten them down before I get going. We'll get them all set in there, and then I'll set the torques. All right, so I've got the old trusty torque wrench set to 70 foot-pounds. I've already torqued all these, but I just wanted to get a recording so you can enjoy the clicking noise. I always enjoy that. I don't know, simple pleasures, right? One more time. Anytime that you're torquing down bolts, make sure that you lubricate them. You don't want the torque to be incorrect based on some sort of abrasion or something. So those are well lubricated nuts or bolts, and I'm going to go pull them off, and then we'll take a reading off of the Plastigage. In case you're wondering how I managed to pull these end bearings out, the other one's a little easier because there's a lip that you can get a piece of wood up under and you can tap it. You don't want to use a screwdriver or anything to start prying in on the bearing surfaces. You just want to use softer material, so wood's obviously a good choice for that. In this case, this is a 3/4 inch bolt. It's one of the bolts that go into here, so it's a pretty high grade bolt. All I did was put a 5/8 inch wrench and then put the bolt through that into there, and then you have a fulcrum with a piece of 2x4, and that 2x4 can go across. This backside in particular has a nice surface that you can do that with. You know, even, that's not a very long fulcrum, but you can tap that with a hammer and it starts to come up real easy. So just in case you're wondering what my method was, there's the method to my madness. Okay, so got all the bearings off. Here you can see this is the number 2 bearing from the front, and our tolerances are not greater than 0.027. 0.3 at the bottom there would be out of tolerance, and you can see we're thicker than that, so we're probably about 0.0019. It's greater than 0.015. It's thinner than that. But I mean, that would be a total squish, and that would probably be way on the outside edge if it got that big. But I think this is really good. I'm going to check all of these for tolerances. They all look good. I don't see any that look particularly skinny, which would be floppy, or particularly fat, which would mean that they're too tight. And this one here, looking at it, it's probably about the same. It's about 157, 156, who knows. It's not real accurate, but just FYI, the reason why you do the Plastigage is a verification step. So when I took the engine apart, we found that there was a bad, this particular bearing was rusted and pitted on the crank, and so we knew that it had to be cleaned up and honed. And so when we sent it out to the shop, I didn't buy any bearings. I waited for them to tell me how many thousandths over. In this case, they grind it out to 30 over. Because, you know, the thing about that is you don't know if it hadn't already been ground once before. So you send it to the machine shop and they tell you what size bearings that you need. If you're sending it to a workshop, they'll buy the bearings. But in this case, it's kind of an oddball size. They didn't really have a source for purchasing the products, and I wanted to buy them anyway myself. So they contacted me, told me what size bearings. So all I'm doing here is I'm verifying that we're within tolerances and that the machining that they did does in fact work with the bearings that I've purchased. It's not about bearing selection, it's about verification. So anybody who tells you, oh, Plastigage isn't that accurate, it's not supposed to be accurate. It's a verification tool for you, because once you go through all this trouble of building the engine, you don't want to have to take it apart. You don't want it to be frozen or seized or have a problem with oil flow. So there's my 2 cents on Plastigage. Now I got to clean up all these bearings, get all this plastic out of here, and then we'll reassemble them. Now when you reassemble, make sure that you use some assembly lube, because this is going to be the final assembly for these. Going to lube up all of the bearing surfaces. I'm going to try to get some lube into some of these oil journals, just to make sure that when you first turn the car over, it's not turning over dry. And the advantage to this assembly lube is it won't foul your oil. It's compatible with whatever oil that you put in there. So it'll break down, but it will keep a good coat of oil or lubricant until the regular oil flow makes it through the bearings. All right, so let's get this put back together. Don't forget, before you put the crank back in, after you've got your assembly lube on everything here, make sure you put your thrust bearings in. The ones without the little tab goes in the bottom, or I guess that would be the top, the way you're looking at it here, but there's a slot for the ones that have slots. You just slide that baby in there. Then when you put the crank in, you don't have to worry about fishing it through. The thrust bearings with the little tabs, they go on the cap on the center bearing. So got those then they just kind of stick to the sides with assembly oil. So you really can't put those in dry. You really need to put some oil on that to make it all nice and sticky. All right, so just one more quick observation before I start torquing these back down permanently. This last little bearing cap right here slides into this groove. This is in the front of the engine. If you can see that joint right there, needs to be flat. So if you're looking at the bolts, the bolt pattern here, these are where the timing chain cover is going to be connected. So you want that to be flush. So before you torque these two bolts down right here, just feel it with your hand, you know, make sure that it's nice and flush. If it feels a little off, you can take a 2x4 and give it a tap with a rubber mallet this way. If it's proud, then just give it a tap with a rubber mallet that way, and you can feel it. It's going to move. There's a little bit of play back and forth in these bolts right here. So just back them off a little bit, let it move and get it back to where it wants to be centered. And once that's nice and flush, go ahead and start torquing them in. So just one little thing there. Same thing with the other side. You can see this one came up nice. This is where the back side of the engine is. It's a little less critical because there's a big plate going to go on here anyway. But it came up nice and flush. So just before you bolt those in, verify that those mating surfaces are flush. Okay, there you go. Mission accomplished. Crankshaft is new bearings. Bearing surfaces were ground out 30 over and new bearings put in, installed. Everything spins real nice. There's no binding. You can see, just to verify, there's the tab on the thrust bearings. Both sides, they didn't get sucked into there. So that's kind of tricky, just when you're working with that. Make sure that you, when you put that in there, go ahead and put those screws right in. Make sure, because it moves around. You don't want to do that. Also, just when you're doing the Plastigage, resist the temptation to turn the crank. If you turn it with the Plastigage, it'll smear and you won't get a good reading, and you'll end up having to do it over again. I didn't do that. It just says in the instructions not to do that. But you know, if you're one of those people who likes to fiddle with things, don't fiddle. So anyway, there you go. This is Nigel, the 1977 MGB, coming right along. He's got his bearing, his new crankshaft in place. As soon as the new pistons come in, then we'll get those press fit at the machine shop, and we'll get those new bearings put in as well. And then we'll do another video on that when we get to that point. Cheers.